When people imagine the Middle Ages, they often picture stone castles, shining armor, and noble feasts. But for the vast majority of people who lived in medieval Europe, the peasants, life was not romantic, heroic, or clean. It was brutal, exhausting, and overwhelmingly filthy. The medieval peasant did not live in a world of chivalry. They lived in mud, smoke, rot, hunger, and disease, from birth to death, with very little relief in between. A peasant's home was usually a single-room hut made of wood, wattle, and daub, with a thatched roof. There was no chimney. Smoke from the hearth filled the room, burning eyes and lungs, blackening walls, and slowly damaging breathing over a lifetime. The same rooms served as kitchen, bedroom, living space, and storage. In winter, animals, pigs, chickens, sometimes cows, were brought inside for warmth. Their breath, dung, fleas, and parasites shared the same air as the family. Privacy did not exist. Cleanliness was a luxury few could afford. The floor was often bare earth mixed with straw. Over time, this straw absorbed food scraps, spilled ale, animal waste, human waste, blood from slaughtering animals, and whatever filth boots carried in from outside. It was rarely changed. The result was a damp, foul-smelling layer of rotting organic matter underfoot. When it rained, the hut became a swamp. When it froze, it became rock-hard filth. Rats thrived here, feeding on scraps and spreading fleas that carried deadly diseases. Bathing was rare. Contrary to modern myths, medieval people did not believe water was evil. But peasants had neither time nor resources to bathe regularly. Heating water required fuel, and fuel was precious. Most peasants might wash their hands and face occasionally, but full-body washing could be weeks or months apart. Clothes were worn constantly, rarely washed, and often slept in. Lice were universal. Fleas were constant companions. Skin infections, rashes, and sores were normal, not exceptions. Toilets, as we understand them, did not exist. Most peasants relieved themselves outdoors, in fields, ditches, behind huts, or in shallow pits near their homes. Human waste mixed freely with animal waste, especially in villages where pigs roamed loose, eating anything they could find, including human excrement. Rain washed filth into wells and streams, contaminating drinking water. Diarrhea, dysentery, and intestinal parasites were common and deadly, especially for children. Food was another daily struggle. A peasant's diet was monotonous and often inadequate. Bread made from coarse grains, barley, rye, oats, formed the backbone of every meal. This bread was dark, dense, and frequently contaminated with dirt, insects, or mold. Poor grain storage meant fungal infections like ergot were common, causing hallucinations, convulsions, and death. Meat was rare for most peasants. When they did eat it, it was often salted, smoked, or partially spoiled. Fresh vegetables were seasonal, and winter meant long months of near starvation. Hunger was not an emergency. It was a condition of life. Most peasants lived one bad harvest away from famine. When crops failed, people ate seed grain, grass, tree bark, and boiled leather. Chronic malnutrition weakened immune systems, making disease far more lethal. Children were especially vulnerable. Many died before the age of 5. Those who survived grew up stunted, scarred, and exhausted before adulthood. Work never stopped. Peasants worked from dawn to dusk, 6 days a week, in all weather, plowing, sowing, harvesting, hauling, threshing. Every task was done by hand, with simple tools that destroyed joints and spines. Back pain, arthritis, hernias, and untreated injuries were widespread. There was no retirement. If you could walk, you worked. If you could not, you became a burden, often left to beg or die quietly. Medical care was primitive and inaccessible. Most peasants relied on folk remedies, prayers, and luck. Infections that are easily treated today, cuts, abscesses, tooth decay, could become fatal. Toothaches were constant, and rotten teeth were often pulled without anesthesia, if they were treated at all. Broken bones healed badly, if they healed. Childbirth was extremely dangerous. Many women died young from complications, bleeding, or infection. Death was everywhere. People died at home, in the same room where the family ate and slept. Corpses were washed, if at all, with cold water, then buried quickly. The smell of death was familiar. During plagues, bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Entire villages were emptied. Survivors continued living among abandoned homes, overgrown fields, and mass graves. Religion promised salvation, but it also reinforced suffering. Peasants were told their misery was God's will, their reward waiting in heaven. Meanwhile, they paid taxes to lords and tithes to the church, even when they were starving. Resistance was punished harshly. A peasant's life was not just dirty. It was controlled, constrained, and expendable. This was the reality of medieval peasant life, not a pastoral dream, but a grinding existence in filth and fear. They endured smoke-filled huts, parasite-infested bodies, contaminated food and water, endless labor, and constant death. Their world was not clean, kind, or forgiving. It was raw, cruel, and profoundly human. And without them, their suffering, their labor, their short, broken lives, the medieval world of kings, castles, and cathedrals could never have existed. Close your eyes now. Let the screen fade. We are drifting back, floating through the mist of centuries to stand inside one of these very homes. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, let your shoulders drop. Imagine you are standing in the center of a peasant's hut in late autumn, perhaps in the year 1250. The first thing that hits you is not the sight, for it is very dark, but the sensation of your eyes stinging. It is a sharp, prickly heat that makes you want to rub them. But your hands are covered in the soot of the day. The air here is blue and thick, hanging in heavy, lazy ribbons near the ceiling. There is no chimney to whisk the fumes away. Chimneys are a futuristic piece of technology that won't be common in peasant homes for centuries yet. Instead, the smoke from the central open fire drifts aimlessly, coating everything in a layer of tar. It preserves the timber beams above, preventing rot. And in a way, it preserves the people too, much like smoked hams, though it leaves them with a permanent, rattling cough. Historians note that excavations of medieval skeletons often reveal sinusitis and rib lesions consistent with chronic respiratory infections, a silent testament to a lifetime spent breathing inside a chimneyless box. You can taste the smoke on your tongue, bitter and oaky. The only light comes from the glowing embers of the hearth in the center of the room, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Reach out and touch the wall near you. It is rough, uneven, and cool. This is wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered over with mud, straw, and animal dung that has baked hard in the sun. It sounds repulsive to our modern sensibilities, but it is effectively windproof. keeping the harsh drafts at bay. The room is small, intimate, and incredibly crowded, even when empty of people. In the dim light, you see the shapes of tools leaning in the corner, a wooden chest, and a low bench. But you also hear breathing that is not human, a soft snort, the rustle of straw, the heavy rhythmic chewing of a cud. Over there, just past the hearth, the family cow is tethered for the night. In the winter, the livestock live on one side of the room, the humans on the other, separated perhaps by a shallow drain in the floor or a flimsy wooden partition. It is a shared survival. The heat radiating from the cow's large body raises the temperature of the hut just enough to keep the frost from killing the family while they sleep. It creates a unique, earthy atmosphere, a blend of wood smoke, unwashed wool, and the warm, grassy scent of the stable. It is not necessarily an evil smell, but it is a thick one, a smell of life packed tight against the cold dark outside. This is where we begin, in the smoky, beating heart of the peasant world. End of part 1. Shift your gaze downward now, away from the curling smoke and the shadowy beams, to the ground beneath your feet. It is uneven, rolling slightly, like a frozen wave, for this is not the flat, sanded timber of a modern home, nor the cold, geometric stone of a castle hall. It is the earth itself, beaten down by generations of heels until it is as hard as fired clay. Yet it possesses a curious, spongy give that hints at what lies just above the soil. This is the era of the rush floor, a feature of medieval life that sounds pastoral and sweet in songs, but carries a much heavier, more complex reality in practice. In the spring and summer, when the meadows are lush, the family might scatter fresh green rushes, wild grasses, sedges, or fragrant herbs like meadowsweet and chamomile across the dirt. In those first few days, the hut smells of a crushed garden, a perfume that masks the underlying odors of unwashed bodies and animal musk. It is a pleasant fiction, a green carpet brought indoors. But as the weeks drag into months and the seasons turn toward the grey wet of autumn, those rushes are rarely swept out completely. Instead, they are often just covered over with a fresh layer, creating a geological sediment of domestic life. Historians and archaeologists studying the floors of preserved dwellings have found that a peasant's floor was effectively a living compost heap, rising inch by inch over the years. Think of it as a historical record of accidents. When a bowl of ale is knocked over in a crowded room, it is not mopped up with a cloth, for cloth is too valuable to waste on the ground. Instead, it sinks into the straw, fermenting quietly. When a scrap of gristle or a fishbone falls from the table, it is not swept away. It is trodden down, buried in the mat of vegetation. The Dutch philosopher Erasmus, writing a bit later in history, but describing a scene timeless to the peasant experience, once noted with horror that these floors harbored spittle, vomit, leakage of dogs and men, and other abominations not to be spoken of. It is a harsh assessment, but not an inaccurate one. Yet, there is a strange, messy harmony to it. The floor has its own ecosystem, its own janitorial staff. If a crust of bread falls, the family dog, a scruffy, sharp-eared terrier bred to kill rats, will likely snap it up before it hits the rushes. If the dog misses it, the pig, wandering in from the cold, will surely find it. And if the pig misses it, the ants and beetles, the tiny, unseen tenants of the hut, will stake their claim. Nothing is truly wasted here. It is merely recycled into the floorboards of the earth. In the quiet of the night, If you listen past the snoring of the family and the heavy breathing of the cow, you might hear the faint, rustling whisper of this microscopic world. It is the sound of thousands of insects moving through the dry stalks. Fleas are not an infestation here. They are a weather condition. They live in the rushes, breeding in the dust, waiting for a warm ankle to pass by. To be a peasant is to be perpetually itchy, a sensation so constant it barely registers as annoyance anymore, just a background static of existence. People have learned to sleep with the crawling, tucking their trousers into their socks, though it rarely helps. And then there are the rats. They are not the terrifying monsters of horror stories, but sleek, opportunistic neighbors who scurry along the edges of the walls where the roof meets the ground. They know the geography of the floor better than the humans do. They know which corner remains damp because the thatch leaks. They know where the grain sack leaks a steady trickle of oats. Sometimes, in the dead of winter, the floor freezes solid, capturing the filth in a suspended state of cryostasis, hard and merciless, on the knees during prayer. In the spring, when the rains come and the roof drips, the floor can turn into a dark, sucking mud that pulls at boots and coats, the hem of every dress in a permanent border of brown. Imagine the sensory experience of walking here in thin leather shoes, or perhaps barefoot if you are a child. The ground is never truly dry, never truly warm. It is a surface that teases the line between inside and outside, essentially bringing the barnyard into the bedroom. Yet, it is also a place of play. Small children, toddlers, with smudges of soot on their cheeks, crawl across this rush matting, their knees calloused and tough. They play with polished river stones or dolls whittled from kindling, seemingly immune to the bacteria teeming inches from their faces. Perhaps this exposure is why those who survive childhood have immune systems of iron, having made their peace with the microbial world before they could even walk. There is a soft, ironic humor in the fact that, while the nobility in their stone castles suffer from gout and chill from the cold, damp rock floors, the peasant's layer of composting straw actually generates a tiny, faint heat of its own, a biological warmth born of decay. It is dirty, yes. It is undeniably foul by our sanitized standards. But in this drafty, single-room world, that layer of filth is also a layer of insulation, a blanket of earth wrapped around the feet of the poor. As we stand here, invisible in the gloom, watching a beetle navigate the vast canyon of a dropped crust of rye bread, we realize that the floor is the foundation of their resilience. It is where they are born, where they sleep, and often where they eventually die, returning their own bodies to the soil that sustained them. It is a humble, grimy, teeming surface, reflecting the messy, intertwined reality of medieval life, where humanity and nature were never quite separated, but mashed together in a layer of straw and mud. Now, let the sensation of touch guide you closer to the human form itself. Imagine lifting your hand to brush against the sleeve of the person standing nearest to the fire. You do not feel the smooth, cool slide of synthetic silk or the airy lightness of polished cotton. Instead, your fingers meet resistance. The fabric is coarse, fibrous, and slightly oily to the touch. This is wool, the heavy, scratchy, miraculous armor of the medieval peasant. In a world without central heating, without Gore-Tex, and without plastic ponchos, wool is the only thing standing between a peasant and the hypothermia of a damp European winter. It is thick, woven tight on a loom that might have sat in this very village, and it smells intensely of the animal it came from. Even years after the sheep has been shorn, the fabric retains a faint, musky scent of lanolin, especially when the air is damp. This grease is not a defect. It is a feature. It makes the tunic naturally water-resistant, causing rain to beat up and roll off the shoulders of the plowman before it can soak through to the bone. But this protection comes at a cost: constant, low-level abrasion. Beneath this heavy outer shell lies the foundational garment of the Middle Ages, the linen shift for women, or the shirt and braise, baggy, drawer-like underwear for men. If you were to touch this inner layer, you would find it surprisingly stiff in places, yet limp and heavy in others. This linen is the second skin of the peasant. It is rarely white, despite what illuminated manuscript might show. Bleaching linen requires hours of sunlight and harsh light treatments that weaken the fiber, so for the working class, it remains a shade of oatmeal or grey. Its purpose is sacrificial. It exists to absorb the sweat, the oils, and the grime of the human body, protecting the valuable wool outer layer from the rot of human biology. And because it absorbs everything, it is the only garment that is ever truly washed. But pause on the word washed. Do not imagine a weekly cycle with floral detergent. For a peasant woman, laundry is a grueling, back-breaking industrial process that consumes an entire day. It involves hauling heavy buckets of water from a stream, heating them over a fire that burns precious wood, and mixing in lye made from wood ash and urine, an ancient stinging chemical cleaner. The clothes are beaten with wooden paddles against rocks or boards to drive out the dirt. This violence shreds the fabric over time. A shirt washed too often becomes a rag too quickly. Therefore, washing is a calculated risk, done perhaps once a month, or seasonally for the heavier items. Between these washings, the linen simply accumulates the history of the wearer's labor. It stiffens with dried sweat and softens again with fresh heat. It becomes a map of the body's exertions. Because bathing is so difficult and changing clothes so risky for the fabric, most peasants simply live in their layers. They wake up in the morning, slide their legs out from under the heavy woolen blanket, or perhaps a pile of sheepskins, and they are already dressed. There are no closets in this hut, no hangers. The concept of pajamas would be baffling, a waste of good cloth. You sleep in your shirt and braise for warmth, and often, in the depths of winter, you sleep in your tunic and hose too. This creates a profound intimacy with one's clothing. The fabric warms to your body heat and never really cools down. It shapes itself to your knees and elbows, bulging permanently at the joints. You do not wear the clothes. The clothes eventually inhabit you. This constant wearing of layers creates a perfect, humid paradise for the medieval peasant's most loyal companion, the body louse. There is a grim historical debate about exactly how infested the average person was. But the consensus is that lice were not a sign of poor hygiene. They were a sign of being human. Everyone, from the lowest serf to the highest bishop, battled them. But for the peasant, who lived in crowded quarters with limited changes of linen, the battle was constant. The lice live in the seams of the clothing, venturing out to feed on blood when the host is warm and still. If you look closely at the family sitting by the fire, you might see a mother grooming her child, picking through their hair or the collar of their tunic. It looks like an act of affection, like a primate grooming ritual. And in a way, it is. It is a social bonding moment, a quiet time to talk, while managing the colony living on their backs. There is even a dark, medieval humor about it. They are sometimes called pearls of poverty or gentlemen's companions. It is a discomfort so universal that it ceases to be shocking and simply becomes a chore, like weeding the garden. Visually, however, the peasant is not the mud-colored blob often seen in modern movies. While the fabrics are dirty and worn, they are not devoid of spirit. The medieval world loves color. Even the poor attempt to dye their wool using what they can find in the hedgerows. Wood yields a blue that fades to a dusty slate. Madder root gives a brick red. Weld offers a muted yellow. Walnut shells produce a rich, dark brown. A crowd of peasants on a market day would be a patchwork of these faded, earthy tones. Mustard yellows, rusty reds, and pale blues, muted by soot and dust, but colorful nonetheless. And patchwork is the literal truth. Cloth is incredibly expensive. To make a single tunic requires shearing sheep, carding wool, spinning miles of thread on a drop spindle, a task that occupies every spare moment of a woman's life, weaving it on a loom and then sewing it. You do not throw clothes away. When a knee wears through, you cut a square from an old, ruined garment and sew it over the hole. When that patch wears through, you patch the patch. A peasant's tunic might be a ship of Theseus garment. After 20 years, hardly any of the original thread remains. Yet it is the same tunic. The stitching is functional, often done with thick linen thread that stands out against the wool. These clothes are heavy with memory. A father's cloak might be cut down to make a son's coat. A worn-out dress becomes a baby's swaddling cloth. The fibers are recycled until they literally disintegrate into dust. Imagine the sensory weight of this. You are carrying 5 or 6 pounds of dense, damp wool on your shoulders. It restricts your movement slightly, pulling at the neck. It itches, a prickly heat that flares up when you sweat near the fire. Underneath, the linen is clammy. And yet, there is a security in it. In a world where the wind can kill, where a scratch can turn into gangrene, these thick, felted layers are a shield. They muffle the sound of the world, they soften the blow of a fall, and they offer a place to hide your hands from the frost. As the fire pops and sends a shower of sparks towards the roof, you watch the peasant brush a spark from his thigh. The wool does not burn. It merely smolders and smells of singed hair, self-extinguishing. It is tough, just like the person inside it. It is a second skin of survival, woven from the landscape itself, dirty, enduring, and absolutely vital. Step with me now towards the heavy wooden door, the only barrier between the smoky intimacy of the hut and the wider world. You lift the latch, a simple piece of shaped wood, polished smooth by thousands of touches, and push. The door groans on leather hinges, a low protesting creak that seems to wake the very air. As you step over the threshold, the atmosphere changes instantly. The stagnant, warm blue smoke of the interior is replaced by the sharp, damp chill of the village morning. But do not take a deep breath just yet. The air here is fresh, yes, but it carries a complexity of odors that would bring a modern city dweller to their knees. You are standing now in the village lane, the artery of peasant life, and it is less a road than a biological event. There is no pavement here, no cobblestones, not even gravel. The lane is simply a strip of earth that has been churned by cartwheels, hoofbeats, and human feet until it has surrendered its structure. In the summer, it is a rutted canyon of dust that coats the back of your throat. But for much of the year, under the grey, dripping skies of northern Europe, it is a soup of mud. Thick, sucking, clay-heavy mud that grabs at your ankles with every step. Look down at your feet. You are standing on the edge of what historians call the common way. But looking at it, you realize there is nothing common about the challenge of navigating it. To walk to your neighbor's house is a tactical exercise. You must hop from a tuft of grass to a submerged stone to a slightly drier ridge of earth. A hopscotch game of survival to keep the muck from breaching the top of your boots. And this mud is not merely wet soil. It is a mixture of everything the village produces and discards. To your left, piled high against the wall of the neighbor's hut, is the midden heap. This is the medieval peasant's answer to trash collection. Though trash is the wrong word, for everything here has value. The midden is a towering, steaming mound of manure from the cowshed, dirty straw from the floor, vegetable peelings, ash from the hearth, and yes, the contents of the chamber pots. It is a monument to the cycle of life. It ferments there, heat rising from it in visible waves in the cold air, waiting for the spring when it will be carted out to the fields. It is, quite literally, brown gold. A large midden is a sign of a prosperous household. It means you have animals to feed and food to peel. But it is also a hazard. Scholarly records from manorial courts, the local legal gatherings presided over by the Lord Steward, are filled with endless, repetitive fines for peasants whose midden heaps grew too ambitious and spilled over into the public lane. John the Miller is fined 2d, a scribe might scratch onto parchment in 1340, for allowing his dung heap to obstruct the king's highway. It serves as a gentle correction to the myth that medieval people were oblivious to filth. They were not. They knew it stank, they knew it was a nuisance, and they tried, in their bureaucratic, clumsy way, to regulate it. But when you live in a world without plumbing or garbage trucks, the filth has to go somewhere. And usually, that somewhere is right outside the front door. Navigating this pungent obstacle course requires alertness, for you are not the only one using the lane. Out of the mist troots a pig, a lean, hairy, razor-backed beast that looks more like a wild boar than the pink, round pigs of modern cartoons. This pig is the village's sanitation engineer. He roams free, his nose twitching, searching for anything edible. He roots through the midden heaps, eats the rotten apples dropped in the mud, and cleans up the waste that humans leave behind. He is useful, but he is also a menace. These semi-feral pigs were known to bite children, dig up garden plots, and trip the elderly. Yet without them, the village would likely drown in its own refuse. There is a dark, practical humor in watching him. He is the only one here who is truly happy, snorting with delight as he finds a particularly fermented cabbage leaf. He is a walking larder, transforming the village's garbage into next winter's bacon. As you walk further down the lane, dragging your heavy boots through the slurry, you notice the lack of privacy. The huts are clustered close together, sometimes sharing walls. The lane is not just a thoroughfare. It is the living room of the community. Women stand in their doorways, spinning wool on drop spindles, while shouting news across the mud to one another. A blacksmith's hammer rings out, a rhythmic clang-clang that serves as the village clock. Children run through the muck, seemingly immune to the cold, chasing a ball made of an inflated pig's bladder. If you were to trip and fall here, a very real possibility given the slick, treacherous ground, 3 people would see it before you hit the earth, and the whole village would know by noon. There is a suffocating closeness to this life. Everyone knows who is sick, who is fighting, who is brewing ale, and who is behind on their rent. The filth of the lane is matched only by the density of the social web. Water management here is a desperate struggle against gravity and contamination. You see a shallow ditch running along the side of the lane, intended to carry rainwater away. In reality, it is stagnant, choked with weeds and runoff from the middens. This is why the village well is guarded so jealously. It is usually located on higher ground, often capped with a wooden cover to keep out leaves and rats. Drawing water is a sacred, heavy chore. To get clean water, you must leave the filth of the lane, winch up a heavy bucket, and carry it back without spilling a drop into the mud. It is physically exhausting work, which explains why people drink so little water and wash so rarely. Why waste a bucket of water on washing a tunic when carrying that bucket cost you 20 minutes of back-breaking labor? You save the water for the pot, for the brewing vat, for the animals. The sensory experience of the lane is overwhelming. It is a cacophony of smells: wood smoke, wet wool, rotting straw, animal dung, and the sharp coppery tang of mud. It is a visual chaos of brown and grey, punctuated by the green of weeds that insist on growing in the thatch of the roofs. And yet, there is a strange beauty in it. The lane curves naturally, following the topography of the land, not a grid. It feels organic, grown rather than built. As the sun begins to burn through the morning mist, the mud glimmers with a wet sheen. A rooster crows, a sound that has signaled the start of the workday for 10,000 years. The lane is dirty, yes. It is a hazard to health and dignity. But it is also the connection point, the tether that binds these families together. It is the stage upon which their entire public lives play out. You can see the tracks of a cart that passed earlier, the deep ruts filling with water, looking like twin rivers. These tracks lead out of the village, past the last wattle fence, and towards the open country. Your eyes follow them. The village is the place of rest and chaos. But out there, beyond the final hut, lies the true purpose of the peasant's existence. The land is waiting. The mud of the lane gives way to the soil of the field, and the smell of waste is replaced by the smell of work. The earth is not just something to walk on. It is a monster that must be tamed, broken, and fed, or the village will die. Follow those deep, water-filled ruts now, out past the last leaning wattle fence, past the boundary marker of an ancient gnarled oak tree, and into the vast open theatre of the fields. Here, the claustrophobia of the village evaporates, replaced by a crushing sense of scale. The sky above is enormous, a grey shifting dome that seems to weigh down upon the earth, and the earth itself stretches out in long, endless ribbons of brown and green. This is the domain of the plough, and if you think of farming as a peaceful, meditative hobby, you must strip that image from your mind. Medieval ploughing is not gardening, it is terraforming. It is a violent, wrestling match with the planet's crust, fought inch by agonizing inch. Stand next to the ploughman for a moment. He is not a generic figure in the distance. He is a man breathing hard, his breath pluming in the chill air, his knuckles white as he grips the handles of the karuka, the heavy-wheeled plough. This is a monster of a machine, a technological marvel of the Middle Ages that changed history yet destroyed the bodies of those who used it. Unlike the light scratch plows of the Mediterranean that merely tickled the dry soil, this northern beast is designed to attack the heavy, wet clay of England, France, and Germany. It is made of massive timber beams and armed with a coulter, a vertical knife that slices the turf, and a plowshare that cuts deep, followed by a moldboard that violently flips the soil over. It weighs hundreds of pounds. It does not glide, it shudders. To move this behemoth requires an engine of massive power. Look ahead of the plow. There is a team of 8 oxen, yoked in pairs, their massive shoulders heaving against the wood. Historians and economists often debate the horse versus ox transition. Horses were faster but more expensive to feed and fragile. Oxen were slow, strong, and could be eaten when they grew too old to work. For the average peasant, the ox remains the king of the field. They are stoic, slobbering giants, their hooves sucking loudly in the mud with every step. The smell here is intense, the sweet, grassy breath of the cattle mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of the overturned earth. It is the smell of raw fertility, of bacteria and roots being exposed to the sun for the first time in a year. The plowman does not just steer, he fights. As the iron share hits a buried rock or a thick knot of roots, the handles buck like a living thing, sending a shockwave up his arms and into his spine. He must constantly lean his entire body weight against the wood to keep the furrow straight. If he slips, the plow jumps and the furrow is ruined. If the furrow is crooked, the drainage fails, the crop rots, and the village starves. The pressure is immense, and he is not walking on flat ground. He is walking in the furrow, the muddy trench created by the previous pass. One foot is often lower than the other, twisting the hips day after day, year after year. Osteoarchaeologists, scientists who study ancient skeletons, can identify a professional plowman centuries after his death. His spine is often twisted, his vertebrae fused or crushed, his knees worn to bone on bone. The earth has literally reshaped his skeleton to fit the tool. But look at the land itself. It is not a checkerboard of square fences. It is an open field system, a massive patchwork of long, thin strips. Because the heavy plow is so difficult to turn, the turning radius of 8 oxen is immense. The fields are plowed in long, straight runs called furlongs, furrow-longs. You do not own a square patch of land. You own scattered strips mixed in with your neighbors. This forces a mandatory cooperation. You cannot harvest your wheat whenever you feel like it. You must wait for the village to decide, or you will trample your neighbor's barley to get to your own. It is a system of enforced community. If the village plow team is sick, your land does not get turned. If you are lazy, your weeds spread to the Lord's strip next door, and you are fined. There is a tactile filth here that is different from the village lane. This is clean dirt, if such a thing exists. As the moldboard flips the soil, you can see worms wriggling in panic, beetles scurrying for cover, and the white, thread-like networks of fungal mycelium being torn apart. Birds, crows, rooks, and seagulls, brought in by storms, swirl overhead, diving into the fresh furrow to snatch up the exposed life. They scream and bicker, a constant soundtrack to the labor. The peasant's boots are caked with pounds of this clay. It dries on his leggings, cracks, and falls off, only to be replaced by fresh mud. His hands are stained permanently dark. The dirt worked so deep into the calluses that no amount of scrubbing will ever remove it. He is becoming the land. And then comes the sowing. Watch the sower, perhaps the plowman's wife or son, following behind. They carry a seedlip, a basket or apron, filled with precious grain. This is the most terrifying gamble of their lives. Every seed they throw onto the mud is a seed they could have eaten today to stop the gnawing in their bellies. They are literally throwing their survival into the dirt, hoping it returns tenfold. The motion is rhythmic, almost a dance. Step, sweep, step, sweep. The golden kernels fly out in an arc, landing in the dark furrows. There is a folk rhyme that captures the grim reality of this math. One for the rook, one for the crow, one to rot, and one to grow. They expect to lose nearly half of what they plant to birds, mold, and pests. It is a margin of error so slim it is almost invisible. The wind out here bites. There are no hedges to break it yet. The peasant's nose runs constantly, wiped on a rough wool sleeve until the skin is raw. Their eyes water, but they cannot stop. The plowing season is short. If the ground freezes hard, the plow cannot cut. If it rains too much, the oxen will bog down in the mire. They are racing the weather, racing the sun. There is no lunch break, no whistle. They eat a hunk of cold bread and cheese while walking, or during the brief moments the oxen need to rest. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the grey clouds in bruised purples and blood reds, the exhaustion sets in. It is a bone-deep weariness, a heaviness that makes the limbs feel like lead. The team is unyoked, the plow left at the headland. The walk back to the village is slow. The adrenaline of the work fades, leaving only the aches. But looking back at the field, there is a satisfaction that is hard to describe. The chaotic, weed-choked earth has been ordered, the ridge and furrow pattern, those undulating waves of soil that you can still see in the English countryside today, fossilized in the grass, has been renewed. They have carved their existence into the surface of the planet. They have turned the filthy mud into a cradle for the future. The transition from the field back to the home is not one of cleaning up, but of layering down. They bring the field with them. The mud on their boots joins the straw on the floor. The dust in their hair shakes out onto the pillow. The smell of the ox is now the smell of the father. As they trudge back towards the rising smoke of the village chimneys, the first stars appear, tiny, cold pinpricks of light that care nothing for the struggle below. The peasant does not look up at them to ponder the cosmos. He looks down, checking his boots, checking the path, checking the earth. For the earth is his master, his mother, and his grave. And tomorrow, the battle begins again. Sit down now on the rough wooden bench that runs along the wall of the hut. Your legs are heavy from the phantom walk through the furrows, and your stomach gives a low, hollow growl. In the center of the room, on a trestle table that is scrubbed but stained with the rings of countless meals, sits the object of all that labor. It is not a side dish, it is the main event. It is the reason the forest was cleared, the reason the oxen were driven to exhaustion, and the reason the peasant endures the mud. It is the loaf. Reach out and pick it up. It is surprisingly heavy, dense as a brick. If you're imagining the fluffy, air-filled slices of a modern supermarket, banish that thought. This is medieval bread, specifically maslin bread, a mixture of rye and wheat, or sometimes barley and oats. It is dark, a deep, earthy brown that speaks of the whole grain, husk and all. The crust is thick, almost like armor, designed to protect the soft interior from the ash of the oven and the dirty hands of the eater. It smells distinct, sour, yeasty, and smoky. Break a piece off. It does not pull apart easily. You have to tear at it, using your shoulder muscles. When you finally wrench a chunk free, look closely at the crumb. It is moist, grayish-brown, and speckled with bits of bran. But if you look even closer, you might see the glimmer of something that shouldn't be there, tiny microscopic shards of stone. This is the hidden grit of history. The grain for this bread was ground between two massive stones, either at the Lord's watermill or, if the family dared to break the law, on a secret hand-quern at home. As the stones grind the grain, they also grind themselves. Slowly, imperceptibly, rock dust mixes with the flour. Over a lifetime, this stone bread acts like sandpaper on the human body. If you were to smile at a peasant elder, you would see teeth that have been worn down flat, sometimes all the way to the gum line, exposing the nerve. It is a slow, grinding agony that begins with the daily meal. Toothaches are a constant companion in this world, a dull throb that pulses in time with the chewing. But the taste is complex. It is sour from the natural leavening. Sourdough was the standard, not commercial yeast. Nutty from the roasted grain and rich. It fills you up instantly. This is fuel. A peasant engaged in heavy labor might consume 2 to 3 pounds of this bread a day. It provides the calories to keep the internal furnace burning against the cold. It is often used as a plate itself, the trencher. A stale slab of this bread serves as the base for stews or meats, soaking up the juices, only to be eaten at the end or given to the dogs as a gravy-soaked treat. However, getting this bread to the table is a source of constant tension. In most villages, peasants are not allowed to bake their own bread at home. The oven, like the mill, is a monopoly of the Lord. You must bring your dough to the communal village oven and pay a fee, usually in dough or coin, to have it baked. This place, the bakehouse, is the village newsroom, warm and smelling of yeast, but it is also a place of anxiety. Will the baker burn your loaf? Will he steal a pinch of your dough? The medieval baker is a figure of suspicion, often the butt of village jokes and the target of laws. The baker's dozen, 13 instead of 12, originated not from generosity, but from fear of heavy fines for short-changing customers on weight. A dishonest baker might be dragged through the village on a hurdle with a rotten loaf tied around his neck. It is a rare moment where the law protects the peasant, acknowledging that bread is life, and to mess with it is to mess with survival. But there is a darker shadow lurking in the flour sack, one that terrified the medieval world more than the dishonest baker. Sometimes, after a wet, cold summer, a black fungus grows on the rye. It looks like a slightly enlarged, blackened grain, easy to miss if you aren't looking. It is called ergot. If this is ground into the flour, the bread becomes a weapon. It causes a condition known then as St. Anthony's fire. The symptoms are horrific and hallucinogenic. It begins with a tingling in the fingers and toes, then a burning sensation as if the limbs are on fire. It constricts blood flow, leading to gangrene. Fingers and toes can turn black and simply fall off. But it also attacks the mind. Whole villages might descend into madness, seeing demons, dancing uncontrollably, or convulsing in seizures. In a world without microscopes, this is not seen as food poisoning. It is seen as demonic possession or divine punishment. Imagine sitting at this table, eating the bread you worked so hard to grow, unaware that it is slowly poisoning your family, turning your safe haven into a house of hallucinations. It is a lottery of death played with every harvest. Yet, usually, the bread is safe. It is the reliable anchor of the day, and it is more than food. It is a spiritual symbol. "Give us this day our daily bread" is not a metaphor here. When the Father cuts the loaf, he often marks the sign of the cross over it with his knife. This is partly a blessing, a thank you to God for the harvest, but it is also a superstition, a way to ensure the bread rises, to keep the devil out of the dough, to preserve the food from mold. The knife he uses is his personal blade, the one he carries at his belt for everything from whittling wood to skinning rabbits. He wipes it on his tunic, adding another layer of grease to the wool, and slices thick wedges for everyone. There is a hierarchy at the table, even here in the filth. The head of the household gets the best piece, perhaps the upper crust, which is less likely to be burnt on the oven floor. The children get the softer insides. If times are lean, the bread is cut with sawdust, ground acorns, or even dried beans to stretch the flour. This famine bread is bitter and hard to digest, sitting in the stomach like a stone. It causes bloating and cramps, a sensation known as the gripes, but it stops the feeling of emptiness. Historians and nutritionists today often argue about the health of the peasant diet. Surprisingly, if, and it's a big if, they had enough of it, the peasant diet was in some ways healthier than that of the nobles. The coarse bread was rich in fiber and vitamins, unlike the sifted white bread of the aristocracy, which was devoid of nutrition. The peasants' bread kept their digestion moving, perhaps too moving, given the dysentery, while the lords suffered from constipation and bowel issues. It is a small, gritty victory for the poor. Their food was uglier, but it kept them alive longer. If the starvation didn't get them first, watch the family eat. There is little conversation now. Eating is serious business. The sound is of chewing, of tearing, of swallowing. They do not sip water with it. They drink ale. Water is dangerous. Ale is safe. The brewing of ale is another endless chore, usually done by the women, transforming dangerous water and barley into a weak, murky alcohol that provides hydration and calories. The ale washes down the dry crumbs, softening the stone dust, numbing the toothache. As the last crust is wiped around the wooden bowl to catch a drop of grease, there is a collective sigh. The belly is full for now. The immediate panic of hunger is pushed back for another few hours. The bread has done its job. It has transferred the energy of the sun and the soil into the muscles of the plowman. It is a simple, sacred, dirty miracle. And as the crumbs are swept off the table, not into a bin, but onto the floor for the patient dog, you realize that this dark, heavy loaf is the true currency of the Middle Ages. Kings may trade in gold, but peasants trade in grain. And in this hut, the bread box is the treasury. Turn your attention now to the dark, soot-stained chain hanging from the central beam of the roof. At the end of it, suspended directly over the orange heart of the fire, swings the cauldron. It is a round, heavy bell of iron, or perhaps brass, its bottom caked in a thick, flaky crust of carbon. This is the most valuable item the family owns, often worth more than the furniture combined. It is listed in wills, fought over by heirs, and patched with reverence when it cracks. It is the altar of the peasant home, for inside this metal womb cooks the eternal stew, the dish that kept Europe alive for 1,000 years. Pottage. Listen to it. Blurp. Sigh. Blurp. It is a thick, viscous sound, like mud boiling. The smell that wafts up from it is heavy and savory, filling the small room with a humid cloud of onions, boiled cabbage, and something faintly pork-like. Pottage is not soup. Soup is thin and watery. Pottage is a solid mass, a porridge of vegetables and grains boiled down until they surrender their individual shapes into a unified grey-green mortar. It is the medieval answer to efficiency. Nothing is wasted here. The outer leaves of the cabbage, the tops of the turnips, the beans that were too hard to grind, they all go into the pot. There is a popular myth that this stew was truly perpetual, never emptied, with new ingredients simply thrown on top of the old, meaning a peasant might be eating a carrot from last month alongside a leek from today. While it is a poetic idea of continuity, the reality was likely less extreme, but still practical. They did not have refrigerators. If the pot was not kept simmering, the food would spoil, so the fire was kept fed, and the pot was kept hot. The flavor profile of the pottage would shift slowly over the week, drifting from a pea-heavy base on Tuesday to a more onion-rich mixture by Friday, depending on what was harvested from the garden. The garden is the unsung hero of this meal. Just outside the back door, usually tended by the women and children, lies a small, chaotic plot of pot herbs. It is not the manicured vegetable patch of a modern suburban home. It is a dense tangle of survival. Here grow the leeks, the onions, the garlic, the stinking roots that the nobility despise as peasant food, claiming they cause headaches and bad dreams. But the peasant knows better. These pungent bulbs are flavor, they are medicine, and they cover the taste of meat that might be slightly past its prime. Alongside them grow the pulses, peas, beans, and lentils. This is the meat of the poor. In a world where a slaughtered pig must last a family all winter, dried peas and beans provide the critical protein needed to rebuild muscles torn by the plow. There is a nursery rhyme you might know. Peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot, 9 days old. That is not nonsense. That is a recipe. A block of cold, solidified pea pottage could be sliced like cheese and taken to the fields for lunch. Dip a wooden spoon into the cauldron now. The spoon is large, shallow, and rough against your lip. There are no forks here. Forks are a bizarre, decadent Italian invention that won't reach the peasant table for centuries. You eat with your spoon, your knife, and your fingers. The texture of the pottage is soft, almost pre-chewed. This is crucial. Remember the bad teeth. Remember the exhaustion. After 14 hours of labor, you do not want to fight your food. You want something that slides down warm and heavy, filling the empty spaces in your gut instantly. If it is a good day, there might be a scrap of bacon in the pot, but bacon here refers to any cured pork fat. It is the white, salty treasure that gives the vegetables a gloss of grease. Fat is not demonized in the Middle Ages. It is worshipped. It is the most precious calorie. A ring of grease floating on your bowl is a sign of prosperity. If the family is poorer, or if it is the lean season, the flavor comes from pot herbs alone: parsley, sage, hyssop, and mustard. These herbs are not delicate garnishes. They are thrown in by the handful, stems and all, creating a grassy medicinal broth that tastes of the wet earth itself. Historians and food scientists often debate the palatability of this diet. To a modern palate, accustomed to crisp textures and distinct flavors, medieval pottage would likely taste like a salty, overcooked vegetable puree. It was mushy, it was monotonous, but it was also surprisingly nutritious. Unlike the lords in their castles, who gorged on roasted meats and shunned vegetables as peasant fodder, the peasant actually ate a fairly balanced diet rich in vitamins, fiber, and plant protein. This is the great irony of the era. The rich suffered from scurvy and gout, diseases of excess, while the poor, if they didn't starve, often had better arterial health, fueled by their inadvertent, vegan-leaning diet. But there are days when the pottage hides a secret. The forests surrounding the village are the king's or the lord's. The deer, the boar, and the rabbits belong to the aristocracy. To kill one is poaching, a crime punishable by blinding, mutilation, or hanging. Yet hunger makes for bold hunters. Sometimes, late at night, a snare is checked, and a rabbit or a hedgehog finds its way into the pot. It is skinned and chopped quickly, the fur buried deep in the midden or burned. When this happens, the family eats with a nervous energy, savoring the richness of the fresh game, but listening for the knock of the bailiff at the door. That rabbit tastes of fear and triumph. It is a stolen calorie, a tiny rebellion against the social order simmering in the broth. Then there is the matter of fasting. The church dictates the menu as strictly as the seasons. For nearly half the year, every Friday, every Saturday, during Lent, and on holy days, meat is forbidden. On these fish days, the pottage changes character again. If the family is near the coast, there might be salted herring, stiff as a board, and needing to be soaked for hours. Inland, it is usually stockfish, air-dried cod that is so hard it must be beaten with a hammer before cooking. Or more likely, it is simply a white pottage made with almond milk, if they are wealthy peasants, or just plain water and oats. The rhythm of the week is measured in the thickness of the stew. Watch the steam rising from the bowls as the family hunches over the table. The steam softens the hard crust of the bread held in their left hands. They use the bread as a scoop, dredging it through the brown sludge, catching the last of the peas. There is a slurping sound, a primal noise of feeding. They share bowls, often two people to a mess dish, a husband and wife, or two brothers dipping in rhythm. It is a gesture of profound intimacy. You cannot hold a grudge against someone you share a soup bowl with. The bacteria, the saliva, the sustenance, it is all communal. Occasionally, you might find a surprise in your mouth, a pebble that escaped the cleaning of the lentils, or a tough hull of a broad bean. You spit it onto the floor where the dog waits. The floor is the final destination for all rejected matter. Bones, gristle, crusts, they all fall down to join the rush matting. As the meal ends, the cauldron is not scrubbed with soap and hot water. That would be a waste. It is scraped out with a piece of wood, perhaps rinsed with a little water, which is then drank as a thin broth and placed back over the dying fire. The iron pores of the pot hold the memory of the meal. The ghost of the onion remains to greet the morning oats. This vessel is the stomach of the house. It is never truly cold. As long as the pot is warm, the family survives. It is a humble, ugly, bubbling thing. But in the flickering light, it looks like a chalice. It holds the alchemy that turns labor into life, turning the cold, unforgiving mud of the fields into the warm blood of the people. The eternal stew simmers on, waiting for dawn, waiting for the next handful of beans, waiting to feed the history that forgets it. Shift your focus now to the sensation of your own skin. In the modern world, we are accustomed to the feeling of being stripped clean daily, our pores scrubbed free of oil, our hair scented with synthetic flowers, our bodies deodorized until we smell of nothing but chemistry. But here, in the dim light of the peasant hut, the skin feels different. It carries a permanent layer, a patina of existence. It is slightly tacky to the touch, coated in a mixture of wood smoke, lanolin from the wool, sweat from the labor, and the dust of the fields. This is not merely dirt. It is a protective barrier, a second skin that the medieval peasant wears with a lack of self-consciousness that would baffle us. There is a persistent, stubborn myth that echoes through our modern understanding of this time. A belief that medieval people never bathed because the church told them that water was evil, that nudity was sinful, and that holiness was found in filth. Let us gently wash that myth away. It is not true. The medieval peasant did not avoid water because of theology. They avoided full immersion because of thermodynamics. Consider the physics of a bath in a single-room hut in December. To fill a tub big enough to submerge a human body would require 30 or 40 gallons of water. That is over 300 pounds of liquid. Every drop of that water must be hauled by hand from the well or the stream, carried in wooden buckets that cut into the fingers, trudged through the freezing mud of the lane, and lifted over the threshold. Then it must be heated. A peasant's hearth is designed for a cooking pot, not a cauldron large enough for a person. Heating 30 gallons of water to a comfortable temperature would take hours and consume a massive pile of firewood. In a world where wood is fuel and fuel is survival, burning a week's worth of logs just to sit in hot water for 20 minutes is not a luxury. It is madness. It is a waste of resources that could mean the difference between a warm hut and a freezing one. So, the tub is a rare sight reserved for the very rich, or for the very sick, or perhaps for a newborn baby who can be washed in a small basin. Instead, the peasant practices the art of the basin wash. Imagine the scene. It is late evening. The shutters are closed against the wind. The mother pours a small amount of warm water that was perhaps used to boil the eggs or rinsed from the cooking pot, into an earthenware bowl. She dips a piece of rough linen cloth into it. This cloth, coarse and grey, is the medieval washcloth. She scrubs the visible parts, the hands, the face, the neck. There is a strong social pressure to have clean hands, especially before eating from the communal dish. Courtesy manuals of the time, though written for the elite, reflect a general societal rule. Let thy fingers be clean. A peasant with manure-caked hands at the dinner table is not rustic. They are rude. But what of the rest of the body? The torso, the legs, the feet? These areas might go weeks or, in winter, months without feeling the touch of a wet cloth. They are encased in the linen undergarments we spoke of, which soak up the sweat and oils. The linen is washed, eventually, but the body underneath remains in a state of hibernation. When the cloth is stripped away, the skin is pale, perhaps marked with the red bites of fleas or the scratches of straw. But then there is the soap. If they use it at all, and they often do for the tough grime, it is not the hard, white bar you know. It is soft soap or black soap, a gelatinous dark goo kept in a small pot. It is made from wood ash, lye, and animal fat, usually rendered from the intestines of the pig during slaughter. It smells of the fire and the butcher shop. It is harsh, alkaline, and stinging. If you get it in your eyes, it burns like acid. It strips the dirt, yes, but it also strips the skin, leaving it raw and red. There is no moisturizer to follow, only perhaps a rub of mutton fat if the skin cracks in the cold. However, the season changes the rules. Let the camera of your mind drift forward to a hot day in July. The sun is high, the air is buzzing with dragonflies, and the heat in the harvest field is unbearable. Here, the river becomes the bathtub. Historians have found countless records of peasants, men and boys especially, but women too in secluded spots, swimming in the local streams and ponds. They splash in the cool brown water, washing away the dust of the chaff. It is a moment of pure, sensory joy. They might use a handful of sand to scrub the skin, an ancient exfoliant. For a brief few months, the village is cleaner. But even then, there is a danger. Medieval chronicles are tragically sprinkled with accounts of drownings. Peasants who went into the river to cool off or wash and were pulled under by currents, tangled in weeds, or simply cramped from the cold water. The river gives cleanliness, but it demands respect. But there is one grooming ritual that is universal, regardless of the season: the comb. Archaeologists, digging in medieval rubbish pits, find them everywhere. Combs made of bone, antler, or wood. They are double-sided, with wide teeth on one side for detangling and very fine, tightly spaced teeth on the other. You know what the fine teeth are for. We mentioned the lice earlier, the constant companions. The comb is the weapon against them. In the evening, by the light of the fire, you might see a couple grooming each other. One sits on the bench, head bowed. The other stands behind, pulling the bone comb through the greasy, matted hair. It is a slow, methodical sound: scrape, pause, snap. The snap is the sound of a louse being cracked between thumbnails. It is intimate, almost primate-like. It is a service you perform for those you love. To be groomed is to be cared for. It is not romantic in the modern sense, but in a world of itchiness, the relief of a good combing is a profound gift. Now consider the smell. If you were to walk into this hut with your 21st century nose, the odor would likely hit you like a physical blow. It is a complex bouquet of unwashed bodies, wood smoke, drying herbs, stale ale, animal dung, and wet wool. But, and this is crucial, to the medieval peasant, this does not smell bad. It simply smells like people. In a world without deodorants, without distinct separation between human and animal spheres, the olfactory landscape is much richer and more intense. The concept of odorlessness as the ideal state is a modern invention. To them, a person who smells of nothing is a ghost. A man smells of his labor. The plowman smells of earth and ox. The smith smells of iron and charcoal. The woman smells of milk and wood ash. These scents are markers of identity. You know who is in the room with your eyes closed. There is even a certain comfort in it, a warm biological familiarity. The only smells that are truly reviled are the smells of disease, the rot of gangrene or the foul breath of sickness, which are seen as omens of death. There is humor here too. The medieval world is aware of its own funk. There are jokes in margins of manuscripts about stinky feet and bad breath. They chew on fennel seeds, parsley, or cloves, if they can afford them, to sweeten their breath. They tuck sprigs of lavender or wormwood into their clothes chests to fight the moths and mask the musty odor of the wool. They are trying, They are not indifferent to hygiene. They are simply playing a game on hard mode, with no running water and no chemistry set. And what of the teeth? We often imagine them as a black, rotting ruin. While sugar is a rare luxury for the rich, sparing the peasant from the specific decay of sweets, the grit in the bread wears the teeth down, as we saw. But they do clean them. They rub their teeth with a rough linen cloth dipped in salt or crushed herbs. They chew on hazel twigs to fray the end into a primitive brush. A peasant's smile might be worn and yellowed, but it is not necessarily a graveyard of rot. In fact, skeletons often showed that, while their teeth were ground flat, they had fewer cavities than the sugar-addicted nobility. As the night deepens in the hut, the family prepares for sleep. There is no changing into pajamas. The outer tunic might be removed, but the shift remains. They wash their faces one last time, splashing the cold water from the bucket to rinse away the soot of the fire. The shock of the cold tightens the skin. They are not clean by our standards. If you swab their skin, the petri dish would bloom with a zoo of bacteria. But they are clean enough. They have washed the day's labor from their hands. They have combed the worst of the parasites from their hair. They are ready to slide under the heavy covers, body against body, adding their own warmth to the pile. In the dark, the smell of wood smoke and humanity settles over them like a blanket. It is the scent of survival. They have made it through another day, and their skin, tough and unwashed, has held them together. But even the toughest skin can be breached, and when the barrier breaks, the darkness rushes in. Let us move from the discomfort of the itch to the sharp, terrifying clarity of pain. In a world without antibiotics, without anesthesia, and without sterile bandages, the peasant's relationship with injury is one of immediate, heart-stopping fear. Imagine a moment in the fields, a slip of the hand while sharpening a scythe, or a misstep that sends a rusted plowshare slicing into a shin. The blood flows, bright and alarming against the mud. In the modern world, this is a trip to the urgent care for stitches and a tetanus shot. Here, it is a roll of the dice with death. The wound itself is not the killer. The bad air or corruption that follows, what we know as sepsis, is the silent stalker. The medical response begins immediately, right there in the dirt. There is no calling for an ambulance. The peasant must become their own doctor. The first line of defense is often shocking to us: urine. It is common knowledge in the village that fresh urine can clean a wound. It is sterile, usually, and slightly acidic. A quick splash of it on a cut is a battlefield antiseptic that has been used since Rome. Then the bleeding must be stopped. If the cut is deep, they might grab a handful of cobwebs from the corner of a barn. This sounds like witchcraft, but it is actually accidental science. Spiderwebs are rich in vitamin K, which helps blood clot, and they form a natural, breathable mesh over the wound. They stick it down with a dab of mud, or perhaps a smear of honey if they have it. Honey being one of the few true antibacterial substances they possess, capable of suffocating bacteria before it can breed. But for more serious ailments, the family must turn to the village's shadow healthcare system. They do not go to a doctor. University-trained physicians are for kings and bishops. They charge in gold and speak in Latin, diagnosing patients by holding a flask of their urine up to the light. The peasant has no access to this Galenic medicine of the four humors. Instead, they go to the cunning woman or the wise man who lives on the edge of the village. Walk with me down the path to her hut. It smells different here, sharper, greener. Drying bundles of herbs hang from her rafters like shriveled bats. She is not a witch in the fairy tale sense, though the line is dangerously thin and will get thinner in later centuries. For now, she is a necessity. She possesses the leechcraft, the inherited knowledge of roots and leaves. She knows that willow bark, when chewed or boiled into a tea, tastes bitter as bile, but dulls the deep ache of a bad back or a fever. She knows this because willow contains salicin, the chemical ancestor of aspirin. She knows that foxglove can slow a racing heart, though she also knows that too much will stop it forever. Her pharmacy is the hedgerow. Watch her work. A child is brought in, flushed with a high fever, thrashing in the delirium of sickness. The response is a blend of botany and theatre. She might crush dried meadow sweet and feverfew into a paste, mixing it with goose grease to create a salve that is rubbed on the child's chest. The smell is pungent, clearing the sinuses. But she does not stop there. She mutters words under her breath, a charm. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on. Is this prayer or magic? In the medieval mind, there is no difference. Medicine is not a secular science. It is a spiritual battle. Illness is often seen as a spiritual defect, a punishment for sin, or the result of elf shot, invisible arrows fired by malicious spirits. To cure the body, you must address the soul. The charm is the syringe that injects the divine power into the herbs. The church is wary of her, but the priest also knows her value. In fact, many remedies are a strange mix of the holy and the pagan, a common cure for a toothache. That agony that drove people mad might involve writing a prayer on a slip of parchment and holding it against the gum, or touching the tooth with a nail that has been used to scratch a cross into the church door. If the pain persists, the solution becomes brutal. There is no dentist. The village blacksmith or the barber, if the village is large enough, brings out the pliers. There is no numbing agent, perhaps only a swig of strong ale if you can afford it. The patient is held down by strong men. The pliers grip the rotten molar. The crack of the root breaking is a sound that stays with you. The hole is then cauterized with a hot iron to stop the bleeding. It is torture as therapy. Let us look at the doctrine of signatures, a guiding philosophy of this folk medicine. It is the belief that God marked every plant with a clue to its purpose. Lungwort, with its spotted leaves that look like diseased lungs, is used to treat coughs. Eyebright, which resembles a human eye, is used for infections of the sight. Walnuts, which look like brains, are eaten for headaches. It is a beautiful, poetic way to view the world. That nature is a puzzle designed for human healing. Sometimes it works, often it does not. But the placebo effect is powerful. If you believe the walnut will cure your headache because God designed it so, the pain often recedes. However, the most dangerous moments are those of transition, birth, and death. Childbirth is the leading cause of death for young women. It happens in the home, in the lying-in month, where the room is darkened and sealed tight to keep out drafts and demons. The midwife is the commander here. She uses oils to stretch the skin, herbs to hasten contractions, and sometimes desperate prayers to Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth, who was said to have burst unharmed from the belly of a dragon. If the baby is stuck, the outcome is grim. There are no cesareans that the mother survives. the focus shifts to saving the soul. The midwife is authorized by the church to perform an emergency baptism if the infant is likely to die, sprinkling water on the head before it even fully emerges. It is a moment of high drama, where theology meets biology in a bloody candlelit room. And if the remedies fail, if the willow bark does not break the fever, if the spider web does not stop the rot, then the family turns to the final resort, the pilgrimage. This is the medieval health insurance plan. If a child is sick, a father might vow to walk barefoot to the shrine of a local saint, perhaps St. Thomas Becket or a local martyr, to offer a candle the exact height of the child. You can see the desperation in the records of these shrines. Lists of miracles, crutches left behind, wax models of eyes and legs hung by the altar. It is a bargaining with the divine. I will suffer this walk. I will pay this coin if you will heal my son. It gives them something to do, a way to channel their helplessness into action. Sensory-wise, sickness in a peasant hut is overwhelming. The air is close, smelling of sweat, sickness, and the strong medicinal smoke of burning juniper or rosemary, which were believed to purify the air. The patient lies on the straw pallet, covered in sheepskins. The family continues their life around them, eating, sleeping, working, because there is nowhere else to go. The sick are not isolated. They are embedded in the center of the household. They are touched, spoken to, and watched over constantly. There is a grim resilience here. We often look back and pity them for their lack of science. But we must also admire their pain threshold. A peasant walks on a broken toe until it heals crooked. They work through chronic back pain that would incapacitate a modern office worker. They endure skin rashes that cover half their bodies without complaining, because complaining does not plow the field. Their bodies are maps of their survival, scarred, lumpy, imperfect, but functioning. But sometimes, a cure appears that is worse than the disease. Historians note the use of mercury for skin conditions or lead-based salves. They are poisoning themselves in an attempt to heal. Yet in the garden, the sage grows, the garlic thrives, and the poppy waits. The poppy, Papaver somniferum. They know this one well, the white sleep. A tea made from its seeds can quiet a screaming baby or ease a dying elder into the dark. It is the ultimate mercy of the medieval garden. As we leave the wise woman's hut, clutching a bundle of dried nettles for a joint pain, we realize that their medical world was not empty. It was full of magic, faith, and dangerous experimentation. They were not passive victims. They fought for their lives with every root and prayer they had. And when they survived, which many did, living into their 50s or 60s, it was a victory won against the odds, carved out of the earth with dirty hands and hopeful hearts. Lift your eyes now from the ground, past the smoke of the village, to the structure that dominates the horizon. It might be a stone castle, jagged and grey against the sky, or perhaps just a fortified manor house with a high wall. It sits physically higher than the village, a constant, silent reminder of the order of things. We have spoken of the tyranny of the weather, the tyranny of hunger, and the tyranny of disease. Now we must speak of the tyranny of men. You are not just a survivor of the elements. You are property, or something very close to it. You are a serf. The word serf comes from the Latin servus, meaning slave. But the reality is more complex and legally tangled. You are not a slave in the ancient sense. You cannot be sold individually at a market like a horse. but you are bound to the soil. If the land is sold, you go with it. You are a feature of the estate, as rooted as the oak trees. You cannot leave the village without permission. You cannot marry without permission. You cannot even grind your own grain without permission. The lord of the manor, whether a knight, a bishop, or a wealthy widow, holds the invisible leash that defines the boundaries of your world. The face of this power is not usually the Lord himself. The Lord is likely away at court, or fighting in a distant war, or visiting one of his 20 other estates. The face you fear is the steward, or the bailiff. Imagine him riding down the village lane on a sleek, well-fed horse that stands a full head taller than your plough ox. He carries a rod of office, and more importantly, a roll of parchment. This parchment is the manorial roll, and it contains the terrifying mathematics of your life. It lists every acre you hold, every chicken you own, and every day of work you owe. This is the labor service, or corvée. It is the rent you pay for your existence. For 3 days a week, often more during harvest, you must leave your own struggling strips of land and work on the Lord's demesne, his personal fields. This is the source of a deep, simmering resentment. Imagine the sun is setting and storm clouds are gathering. Your own wheat is ripe and needs harvesting before the rain ruins it. But it is Tuesday. Tuesday belongs to the Lord. So you must turn your back on your own livelihood to harvest his crop first, watching the rain begin to fall on your own field as you work for a man who has never held a sickle in his life. It is a theft of time that burns in the gut more than hunger. But the extraction does not stop at labor. The Lord has monetized every aspect of your daily survival. We mentioned the mill and the oven, but the fees go deeper. There is pannage, the fee to let your pigs root for acorns in the forest. There is turbary, the fee to cut turf for fuel. There is wood penny, agistment, and chevage. If you brew ale and sell a cup to a neighbor, the Lord takes a cut. The ale corner will come to taste it and tax it. If you want to marry off your daughter to a man from a neighboring village, you must pay merchant, a fine to compensate the Lord for the loss of her future children, who would have been his future workers. It is a system designed to strip any surplus wealth you might accidentally accumulate. The most brutal of all is the death tax, known as heriot. Let us stand in the shadow of a tragedy. The father of the household has just died. The family is grieving, the women keen loudly by the fire. The future is uncertain. The bailiff arrives not with condolences, but with a demand. By law, the Lord is entitled to the best beast of the deceased tenant. The family must hand over their best ox, or their only cow, or their finest horse. It is a kick in the teeth to a family already down. Then, the church steps in for its share, the mortuary fee, often taking the second best beast or the dead man's cloak. The widow is left with a grieving family, a cold hearth, and the two most valuable assets of the farm gone in a single afternoon. It is a legalized looting of the dead that keeps the peasant class permanently fragile. Yet this power is exercised in a setting that looks surprisingly like a courtroom. This is the manor court, held in the Lord's Hall or under a great tree. Attendance is mandatory. If you don't show up, you are fined. Here, the community's dirty laundry is aired and taxed. The records of these courts are a goldmine for historians, revealing that peasants were not silent victims. They were litigious, argumentative, and constantly pushing back. You might hear a case where a villager is fined for improperly plowed furrows or for speaking ill of the bailiff. There is a dark comedy in the pettiness of it. Alice is fined 1 penny for eavesdropping at the window. Thomas is fined 2 pence for drawing a knife on Robert during a game of dice. Historians still argue about the level of agency peasants had. Were they crushed under a totalitarian boot? Or was it a negotiation? The truth is likely a tense standoff. The Lord needs the peasants. Without them, he has no food, no income, no status. He is a parasite, and a parasite cannot kill its host. The peasants know this. They engage in weapons of the weak. They drag their feet when working the Lord's land. They pretend to be stupid to break tools. Oops, the handle snapped again. They hide the best sheep in the woods when the tax collector comes. It is a low-level, silent guerrilla war fought with sullen looks and slow movements. Occasionally the curtain slips, and you see the raw violence underneath the legal parchment. If a serf runs away to a town, town air makes free is the saying, for if you stay in a chartered town for a year and a day, you are free. The Lord can send men to hunt him down. He can be dragged back in chains, branded or hamstrung. The freedom of the medieval world is a tiny island in a sea of ownership. But there is also a strange protection in serfdom. Because you are property, the Lord has a vested interest in your survival. In times of famine, a good lord, and there were some, might open his granaries to feed his serfs, not out of charity, but because he needs them alive to plant next year. A free peasant who rents land but owes no service has no such safety net. If he starves alone. It is a grim trade-off. Freedom for security, chains for bread. Stand in the court now as the bailiff reads a charge. A woman is accused of scolding, talking back to authority too loudly. The punishment is the cucking stool or ducking stool, a chair suspended over the pond where she will be dunked in the cold, muddy water to cool her tongue. The village watches. Some laugh. Cruelty is entertainment here. But others look down, their jaws set tight. They know it could be them next week. The humiliation is the point. It is a theater of power designed to remind everyone who owns the pond, the chair, and the woman herself. And yet, despite the crushing weight of the Lord's hand, the peasant finds ways to carve out a life. They form their own horizontal alliances. The village community is a fortress against the vertical power of the Lord. They cover for each other. They share the fines. They swear in court that no, we didn't see who cut down the Lord's tree, presenting a wall of silence that the bailiff cannot break. This solidarity is the armor of the poor. As the sun sets on the manor house, casting a long dark shadow that literally stretches across the peasant huts, the psychological weight is palpable. You are always being watched. The Lord's mill grinds your corn. The Lord's court judges your quarrels. The Lord's war takes your sons. You are living in a borrowed world. But in the quiet of the hut, when the door is barred, there is a space the Lord cannot touch. The thoughts in your head, the whispered stories by the fire, the love for your children. These are the only things that are truly yours. You are bound to the soil, yes, but the soil is also bound to you. You know it better than the Lord ever will. He owns the parchment title, but you own the mud on your boots. And in the long run of history, the parchment will burn, but the mud remains. Look now into the shadows of the hut, away from the fire's center, to the small bundles of rags sleeping on the straw. These are the children of the village, the next generation of serfs, sleeping deeply with the total abandonment of the young. History has often been unkind to them, not just in life, but in memory. There is a persistent scholarly myth, born in the 1960s with the historian Philippe Ariès, that medieval parents did not allow themselves to love their children. The theory went that because death was so common, parents maintained an emotional distance, treating their offspring as interchangeable units until they proved they could survive. Let us dismantle this cold idea. If you read the coroner's rolls, the records of accidental deaths, you do not see indifference. You see panic. You see a father diving into a well to save a drowning toddler. You see a mother burned while trying to pull a baby from a hearth fire. You see grief that echoes across the centuries. In one heartbreaking account from 13th century England, a father found his young son dead in a ditch, and the scribe noted he was distraught with a grief that would not be silenced. They loved their children ferociously, perhaps even more so because they knew how fragile that life was. But the fragility is a statistical wall they must climb. The first year of life is a minefield. Roughly 1 in 3 babies does not see their first birthday. If they make it to 5, their chances improve, but the threat never vanishes. This high mortality rate skews our understanding of life expectancy. If you hear that the average life expectancy was 30, it does not mean everyone dropped dead at 30. It means that for every person who lived to 60, another died in the cradle. This creates a demographic reality where the village is swarming with young bodies, but the graveyard is too. For those who survive the cradle, there is a brief, golden twilight of childhood before the weight of the world settles on their shoulders. Archaeology reveals the toys of the poor, simple, poignant objects. A spinning top carved from bone, a doll made of rags with a painted face, a buzzer made from a pig's knuckle bone on a twisted string. They play games that are timeless: tag, blind man's bluff, and hide and seek. But watch closely what they play. They play house, they play plow, they play priest. Their play is a rehearsal for the labor that awaits them. A little girl mimics her mother's kneading of the dough with a lump of mud. A little boy whips a stick at an imaginary ox. They are downloading the software of survival through the interface of fun. But this period is short. By the age of 7, the church's age of reason, the exemption from labor ends. There is no school bus, no classroom. Their school is the barn, the field, and the kitchen. The curriculum is exhaustion. A 7-year-old boy is given his first job, and it is often a lonely one: bird scaring. Imagine being 7 years old, sent out alone into a massive, muddy wheat field in the grey dawn of March. Your job is to act as a human scarecrow. You carry a wooden clapper or a bag of stones. For 12 hours, you must run back and forth, shouting and clapping, chasing away the crows and rooks that want to eat the seed. It is mind-numbingly boring and terrifyingly lonely. The field is vast, the wind is cold, and the woods at the edge are dark. If you fall asleep and the birds eat the crop, you will be beaten. If you lose your shoes in the mud, you will be beaten. It is a lesson in responsibility that is brutal in its isolation. For the girls, the labor is more domestic, but no less grueling. They become the little mothers. A 6-year-old girl is often left in charge of her younger siblings while the parents work the harvest. She must feed them, clean them, and keep them out of the fire. She learns to spin wool almost as soon as she can walk. The drop spindle, a simple wooden stick with a weight, is her constant companion. She spins while walking, while watching the geese, while waiting. It is a skill that requires infinite patience, turning fluff into the thread that will eventually clothe the family. Her hands, though small, are already becoming rough, the skin thickening on her fingertips. There is also the job of cleaning. After the harvest, when the men have cut the wheat and carted it away, the women and children are allowed into the fields to pick up the stray stalks left behind. It sounds pastoral, like a painting by Millet, but it is backbreaking work. You are bent double, scouring the stubble for single grains of wheat. The sharp stalks cut your ankles. The sun beats down on your neck. It is a race against the pigs, who will be let in next to clean the field. Every stalk you find is bred for the winter. It teaches the child a fundamental lesson of peasant economics. Nothing is too small to save. Diet affects them visibly. If you were to look at the teeth of a medieval skeleton, you might see horizontal lines across the enamel. These are called enamel hypoplasia. They are the biological scars of childhood malnutrition or severe illness. They are moments when the body said, "I do not have enough energy to grow teeth today. I must focus on staying alive." Most peasants carry these lines. They are a barcode of famine, a permanent record of the hungry years they survived as children. And yet, there is resilience. These children are incredibly tough. They run barefoot over gravel without flinching. They can climb trees like squirrels to knock down nuts. They know which berries are sweet and which will kill you. They know the calls of the birds and the tracks of the fox. They are feral in the best sense of the word, connected to their environment in a way modern children are not. They do not have nature deficit disorder. They have nature immersion. But accidents are the shadow that stalks them. The coroner's rolls are full of tragic vignettes. A child playing in the mill and crushed by the wheel. A child falling into a vat of boiling water. A child gored by a boar. The village is a dangerous factory floor, and there are no safety rails. This constant proximity to danger makes the parents protective, yet fatalistic. They warn them, they shout at them, but they cannot lock them away. The work must be done. There is no teenager phase in the Middle Ages. You do not get a period of rebellion and self-discovery. You go from child to small adult. By 12 or 13, a boy is doing the work of a man, perhaps leading the ox team or threshing grain with a heavy flail. A girl is ready for marriage or service. The transition is marked not by a graduation ceremony, but by the assumption of full taxes. You are now a cog in the machine. As the children sleep in the pile of straw, their breathing soft and rhythmic, they look peaceful. But look at their hands, resting on the blanket. They are already scarred. They are already calloused. They are the hands of workers in waiting. In their dreams, perhaps they are not hungry, perhaps the birds are not stealing the grain, perhaps the winter is not coming. But outside the hut, the wind is rising, and the morning will bring the work again. They are the small, sturdy links in the chain of history, inheriting a world of mud and duty. And they will carry it forward, one heavy step at a time. The door is shut now, barred from the inside with a heavy beam of oak. The mud of the lane has hardened into iron ridges of frost, and the sky has lowered itself, pressing a grey woolen lid over the world. We have entered the dead time of the year. In the medieval calendar, the months of intense labor are over, replaced by a season of endurance. This is winter, the great simplifier of life. For the peasant, the world shrinks dramatically. It is no longer the vast open fields or the distant market town. The world is now exactly the size of the hut's four walls. Sensory starvation sets in outside. The vibrant greens and browns of the landscape are erased by snow, which, in the 13th and 14th centuries, is becoming deeper and more frequent. Historians identify this period as the onset of the Little Ice Age, a global cooling event that turned European winters from nuisance to nightmare. The Thames freezes solid. Birds drop dead from the trees in mid-flight. Inside the hut, the sensation is one of aggressive contrast. One side of your body, the side facing the central hearth, is roasting, skin-flushed and hot. The other side, facing the drafty wattle wall, is shivering. You exist in a constant thermal battle, rotating like meat on a spit to stay alive. But you are not alone in this box. This is the season of the living radiator. As the temperatures plunge, the animals are brought in to stay. It is a matter of pure economics. A cow is too valuable to freeze to death outside. So she stands there, tethered in the corner, her large wet nose huffing clouds of steam into the room. The pig is there too, grunting in the straw. To a modern nose, the smell would be suffocating, a concentrated barnyard stench trapped in a room with no ventilation. But to the peasant, this smell is the scent of safety. A full-grown cow generates about 3,000 BTUs of heat per hour. She is a biological furnace. Families sleep huddled against the flank of the livestock, borrowing their body heat. There is a profound interspecies intimacy here that has been lost to time. The slow, rhythmic chewing of the cow's cud is the metronome of the winter night, a sound that says, "We are still here. We are still warm." The rhythm of time itself changes. The sun rises late and sets early, leaving 16 hours of darkness. Candles made of beeswax are for the church. The peasant uses rushlights, dried pith of the rush plant soaked in animal fat. They burn with a smoky, sputtering flame that gives off barely more light than a firefly. You cannot do detailed work. You cannot read, even if you knew how. So, the darkness dictates a new state of being. This brings us to the fascinating historical reality of segmented sleep. Without artificial light to keep them awake, medieval people did not sleep in one 8-hour block. They went to bed at dusk, slept for 4 hours, the first sleep, and then woke up around midnight. For an hour or two, the hut would be awake in the quiet dark. This was the watch. People would talk softly, tend the fire, pray, or be intimate. It was a private, magical time, a secret pocket of consciousness in the middle of the night. Then, they would drift back into the second sleep until dawn. This biological rhythm, now lost to our electric world, was the natural pulse of the peasant winter. But the days are not spent idly. There is a myth that peasants hibernated, like bears. While they certainly worked less than in harvest, idleness was a sin and a danger. The women spin endlessly. The whir of the spindle and the click of the loom are the soundtrack of the winter. They are making the clothes for next year. The men mend tools, whittle spoons, or thresh grain in the barn. A dusty, choking job of beating the dried wheat stalks to release the kernels. It is indoor work, repetitive and dull, but necessary to keep the madness of cabin fever at bay. And then there is the food. The diet shifts dramatically. The fresh vegetables are gone. The pottage is now made from dried peas, onions stored in the rafters, and the winter's great prize, bacon. November was Blood Month, the blood month, when the pigs that could not be fed through the winter were slaughtered. Every scrap of the animal was preserved. The meat was rubbed with rock salt, a precious, expensive commodity, and hung in the smoke of the rafters. By January, this meat is hard, dark, and intensely salty. Before eating, it must be soaked in water for hours to draw out the brine. It is tough, chewy, and tastes of smoke, but the fat is life-saving. It provides the energy to keep shivering, to keep the body's core temperature up. However, the shadow of the hungry gap looms. This is the terrifying period in late winter and early spring when the old harvest is running out, but the new crops have not yet grown. The peasant watches the grain sack with obsessive fear. Every handful of oats taken out is a calculation. If we eat this now, will we starve in March? They begin to ration. The bread gets harder, filled with more beans and less wheat. The pottage gets thinner. The adults eat less, so the children can eat more. There is a physical shrinking of the village. Faces grow gaunt. Energy levels drop. The cold seems to bite deeper when the belly is empty. To pass the long, hungry hours, they turn to the oldest form of entertainment, the story. The oral tradition is not just a pastime. It is the library of the illiterate. Sitting by the embers, the elders spin tales that are a mix of scripture, superstition, and local gossip. They tell of saints who battle dragons, of goblins that sour the milk, of the time the old lord fell off his horse in the mud. These stories are immersive, violent, and often funny. They create a shared reality, a mental escape from the smoky room. The myth in our narrative is not just about history. It is about the myths they told themselves to make sense of the dark. They believed the winter was a battle between the sun and the frost giants, or a time when the veil between the living and the dead was thin. The wind howling down the chimney was not just air. It was the wild hunt, a pack of ghostly hounds chasing sinners across the sky. Fear and wonder kept them entertained. Outside, the world is hostile. If you must go out to chop wood or break the ice on the well, you wrap yourself in everything you own. The sensation of the cold is a physical assault. The wind finds the gaps in your tunic. The snow gets into your boots, melting against your socks and freezing again. Frostbite is a real danger. A blackened toe or a numb ear is a common winter trophy. Wolves, too, are a reality. Driven by the same hunger that gnaws at the peasant, they come closer to the villages in winter. You might hear their howls, sharp and lonely, echoing from the forest edge. It is a reminder that humans are not the apex predators here. The cold is. Yet, there is a strange suspended peace in the winter. The grueling, back-breaking labor of the plow is paused. The mud is frozen solid, cleaner in its rigidity. The village is quiet, buried under the snow. There is a communal slowing down, a collective conservation of energy. Neighbors might gather in one hut to share a fire, saving wood. These spinning bees are social events, filled with chatter and the sharing of warmth. It is a time of consolidation. The peasant is like a seed dormant in the frozen earth, waiting, enduring, holding on to the spark of life deep inside the shell of the hut. As you sit there in the dark, listening to the wind batter the thatched roof, you realize that winter is the ultimate test of the peasant's philosophy. It is a test of faith that the sun will return. It is a test of discipline to not eat the seed grain. It is a test of love to share the last scrap of bacon. They endure the boredom, the smoke, the darkness, and the hunger with a stoicism that is hard for us to comprehend. They do not expect comfort. They expect survival. And as the weeks drag on, as the stored apples rot and the woodpile shrinks, they watch the sky, waiting for the first softening of the light, the first drip of the melting thaw that signals the return of the mud, and with it, the return of life. But life is not merely a long grey tunnel of endurance. If you look at the medieval calendar, you see something startling. It is punctuated by explosions of color. These are the holy days, the linguistic ancestor of our holidays. Contrary to the popular image of the peasant enslaved to 365 days of labor, the medieval peasant actually enjoyed more time off than the average modern American worker. Between Sundays, saints' days, and the great festivals of the church, a peasant might rest for 80 to 100 days a year. These days are the pressure valves of the medieval world, the moments when the lid is taken off the boiling pot of society to let the steam escape before it explodes. Imagine the transformation of the village on a bright morning in May. The mud of the lane, usually a hazard, is now hidden beneath a carpet of sweet-smelling rushes and wildflowers. The grey wattle of the huts is draped in garlands of hawthorn and birch boughs. The village, usually a place of browns and greys, suddenly riots with green. This is not subtle decoration. It is an act of defiance against the drabness of existence. The soundscape changes too. The rhythmic thud-thud of the flail and the moo of the ox are replaced by the high, piercing squeal of the bagpipe. This is the peasant's instrument, loud, durable, and capable of being heard 3 fields away. It is joined by the rhythmic beating of a tabor drum. The music is not complex symphonic art. It is driving, repetitive, and primal. It is designed for one thing, to make tired bodies move. And move they do. Watch the dancing in the churchyard. It is not the polite, spaced-out waltzing of a ballroom. It is the carol, a circle dance where everyone holds hands, man, woman, child, elder. They spin, they stomp, they sing. The physical contact is constant. In a life where personal space is non-existent, this organized closeness is a celebration of their unity. They are a single organism, moving in time. The churchyard, usually the solemn resting place of the dead, becomes the playground of the living. The graves of the ancestors are right there underfoot, and the peasants feel no disrespect in dancing on them. In fact, it is a way of including the dead in the fun. We are still here, the stamping feet say to the bones below. We are still dancing. The center of this joy is often the church ale. This is the medieval equivalent of a bake sale, but with significantly higher alcohol content. The church wardens brew massive batches of strong ale, and the village gathers to buy and drink it, with the proceeds going to fix the church roof or buy a new candle. It is piety through intoxication. The ale flows freely, and for a few hours, the chronic ache in the back, the worry about the harvest, and the fear of the plague dissolve in a golden, malty haze. The strict social hierarchy softens. The miller might buy a drink for the ploughman. The priest might look the other way as a couple sneaks off into the woods. And there is food, sweetness, that rarest of sensations. Sugar is a fortune, but honey is local. On these days, there might be flamiches, pastries filled with cheese and egg, or gingerbread made with breadcrumbs, honey, and spicy pepper. To a palate used to bland pottage, these flavors are fireworks. The sensory overload is intentional. The church knows that to keep the soul loyal, you must occasionally feed the body. But the joy has a sharp, chaotic edge. Medieval fun is rough. Consider the game of camp ball or mob football, often played on Shrovetide. The rules are simple. Get this inflated pig's bladder to the other end of the village. The teams are not 11 men. They are the entire male population of 2 neighboring villages. There are no referees. There are no fouls. It is a brawling, shoving, tumbling mass of humanity. Broken noses, fractured shins, and even drownings in the village pond are common. It is a way to channel the aggression of frustrated young men. A sanctioned violence that prevents them from turning that anger against the Lord. Then there are the festivals of inversion, like the Feast of Fools or the election of a boy bishop. For one day, the world is turned upside down. A child is dressed in the priest's vestments and leads the service. The peasants mock the nobility. They wear masks with grotesque noses. They sing bawdy songs in the nave of the church. It seems dangerous, this mockery of power. But the authorities allow it because they understand human nature. It is a safety valve. By allowing the peasants to play at being kings for a day, the real kings ensure they remain peasants for the rest of the year. It is a controlled rebellion, a way of saying, we know the world is unfair. Let us laugh at it for a moment so we can bear it tomorrow. Romance, too, blooms in the chaos. For the young people, these festivals are the primary dating apps of the Middle Ages. A young man might buy a ribbon at a fair for a girl he has been watching across the furrows. A love token, a pewter badge, or a ring made of rush is exchanged. The anonymity of the crowd, the noise, and the ale create a cover for flirtation that is impossible in the quiet scrutiny of the daily lane. Many a marriage contract begins not with a lawyer, but with a stolen kiss behind the bonfire on Midsummer's Eve. Sensory details of the night are particularly vivid on Midsummer. This is the celebration of the longest day, the triumph of light. Great bonfires are built on the hills. The peasants leap through the flames, a terrifying and exhilarating feat, believing the fire will burn away bad luck and purify them for the coming year. The smell of wood smoke mixes with the scent of sweating bodies and roasted meat. The firelight glints on teeth that are laughing, on eyes that are wide with the thrill of the leap. For a moment, they look not like downtrodden serfs, but like ancient heroes defying the dark. There is a myth that the medieval church was a joyless oppressor, crushing all fun. The truth is more nuanced. The church was the organizer of the fun. The calendar of the church was the calendar of the party. The priest blesses the ale. The bells that call them to prayer also call them to the dance. The sacred and the profane are not enemies here. They are dance partners. As the sun sets on the festival, the energy shifts. The children have fallen asleep in the grass, their faces sticky with honey. The musicians are packing away their pipes. The ale barrels are empty. There is a melancholy that settles over the village. The Sunday evening blues, amplified 1,000 times. They know what tomorrow brings. The mud is waiting. The plough is waiting. The bailiff is waiting. The escape was temporary, but as they stumble back to their huts, arm in arm, singing the last scraps of a song, they carry something with them. It is the memory of the color, the flash of a red ribbon, the taste of the spice, the heat of the fire. These memories are the fuel that will get them through the grey weeks ahead. They have tasted a different world, a world of abundance and laughter. And that taste proves that life is not only suffering, it is also capable of being sweet. They enter the dark hut, the embers of the hearth still glowing from the morning. They are exhausted, not from work, but from joy. And as they lie down on the familiar lumpy straw, the ringing in their ears is not the tolling of the death bell, but the echo of the drum. They sleep deeply, the ghost of a smile on their faces, ready to face the mud again, because they know with absolute certainty that the music will return. But the music did not last. The drums faded, the garlands withered, and the seasons turned, until one summer, a silence arrived that was louder than any storm. We must now walk into the darkest chapter of the medieval story, a moment so catastrophic that it cleaved history in two. It is the year 1348. You are standing in the village lane again, but the mud is dry and cracked. The air is still, terrifyingly so. There is no sound of the blacksmith's hammer. There is no laughter from the alehouse. Even the church bell, the heartbeat of the parish, has ceased to ring, for the priest is dead, and there is no one left with the strength to pull the rope. This is the arrival of the great pestilence, what later generations would call the Black Death. It did not come with an army's roar. It came quietly, hidden in the very fabric of the trade that sustained the world. It arrived in the soft fur of black rats that scurried up the ropes of Genoese trading ships, and more specifically, in the gut of the tiny blind flea, Xenopsilla chaopis, that rode upon them. When the rats died, the fleas jumped. They jumped to the cats, to the dogs, and finally, to the people. They landed on the wool tunics we have described, burrowed through the layers of linen, and bit into the unwashed skin. It was a small, itchy annoyance, nothing new to a peasant used to parasites. But this bite was different. It injected Yersinia pestis, a bacteria of such lethal efficiency that it would kill nearly half of the population of Europe in 5 years. The horror begins in the body. Imagine waking up with a fever that feels like being roasted on a spit. You are shivering, yet your skin burns to the touch. Then come the buboes. These are swellings, hard and painful as rocks, that erupt in the lymph nodes of the groin, the armpit, or the neck. They grow to the size of apples, turning from angry red to a bruised necrotic black. The black in Black Death. They are agonizing. If they burst, discharging a foul-smelling pus, you might, just might, survive. But usually the poison spreads inward. Dark blotches appear on the skin, known as God's tokens, the receipts of guaranteed death. You begin to cough, spitting up blood. The end comes swiftly, often within 2 or 3 days. There is a saying from the time. They ate lunch with their friends and dinner with their ancestors. But the true horror is not biological, it is social. The plague destroys the one thing the peasant relied on for survival, the community. The fear of contagion is so absolute that it dissolves the bonds of love. Giovanni Boccaccio, witnessing the plague in Italy, wrote words that still chill the blood. Fathers and mothers refused to nurse and assist their own children, as though they did not belong to them. In the village hut, the scene is a nightmare. A mother, sick and delirious, is left alone in the dark, her family having fled to the woods in a futile attempt to escape the bad air. The eternal stew goes cold on the hook, the fire burns down to ash. The cow, unmilked and in pain, lows mournfully in the corner, a sound that echoes through the thin walls of the dying house. The smell is inescapable. It is the smell of unburied bodies, of rotting straw, of sickness. The village, usually a place of managed filth, becomes a place of toxic waste. Peasants, who once meticulously managed their midden heaps, now throw waste anywhere or nowhere. Why clean the floor when the world is ending? The rats, the vectors of the doom, thrive in this new chaos, breeding in the abandoned granaries, unaware that they are the architects of the silence. Historians debate how the peasants understood this apocalypse. They did not know about germs. To them, this was not a medical crisis, it was a cosmic judgment. It was the arrow of God punishing a sinful world, or it was miasmo, corrupt, sticky air released by earthquakes or planetary alignments. Their response was heartbreakingly useless. They carried posies of flowers and herbs to hold to their noses, believing sweet smells would block the bad air. They burned juniper and rosemary in the streets. They killed the village cats and dogs, thinking they carried the disease, ironically, removing the only predators that could have killed the rats. They whipped themselves in public processions, the flagellants, trying to bleed the sin out of Europe to appease an angry god. The burial customs, so sacred to the medieval mind, collapse entirely. There are no more individual graves. The churchyard is full. The ground is torn open into long, deep trenches. Bodies are stacked like firewood, layer upon layer, with only a thin dusting of earth between them. A peasant who spent his life toiling for a distinct strip of land ends up in a nameless communal pit. The priest, if he is still alive, stands at the edge, muttering a hasty absolution for 100 souls at once, his voice muffled by a cloth over his face. The dignity of death is stripped away. And yet, in this desolation, a strange thing happens. The silence of the village begins to shift the balance of the world. As the weeks drag on and the dying slows, the survivors emerge from their huts, blinking in the sunlight, looking like ghosts. They look around and realize the math has changed. The village is half empty. The fields are overgrown, but the crops are still there, waiting to be harvested. The lord of the manor is desperate. His workforce is gone. He needs the wheat cut, or he will starve just like the serfs. He calls for the survivors. "Come work my domain," he orders, as he always has. But for the first time in centuries, the peasant does not simply obey. The peasant looks at the empty field, looks at the desperate lord, and says, "No, not unless you pay me more." It is a seismic moment. The law of supply and demand, usually a concept for merchants, hits the mud of the village. Labor is suddenly the scarcest, most valuable commodity on earth. A plowman who once worked for pennies can now demand shillings. If the lord refuses, the peasant simply walks away to the next village, where the next lord is even more desperate. The chains of serfdom, forged in iron for hundreds of years, are rusted through by the bacteria. The golden age of the peasant is about to begin, born from the ashes of the dead. There is a dark survivor's humor that emerges, a fatalism that laughs at the grim reaper. The artistic motif of the danse macabre appears on church walls, skeletons dancing with kings, bishops, and peasants alike. The message is radical and clear. Death levels us all. The peasant sees the lord rotting in the same earth, turning just as black, smelling just as foul. The mystique of nobility is pierced. They are just meat, like us. Walk through the village now, in the aftermath. Empty huts stand with doors swinging in the wind, reclaiming the earth. These lost villages will eventually disappear, leaving only bumpy outlines in the grass for future archaeologists to find. The survivors move into the best houses. They take the extra land. They eat the extra cows. A peasant family that once shared a single room with the pig might now take over the neighbor's larger cottage. They wear the clothes of the dead, better wool, brighter colors, because why let them rot? The diet improves instantly. With fewer mouths to feed, there is more meat, more cheese, more ale for everyone left. The survivor is better fed than his father ever was. It is a gruesome inheritance, a prosperity purchased with the lives of half the family. But they take it. They have to. As the sun sets on the post-plague village, the silence is no longer terrifying. It is pregnant with possibility. The heavy hand of the past has been lifted, not by a revolution of swords, but by the indiscriminate slaughter of nature. The peasant stands in the overgrown furrow, holding a scythe that feels lighter now. He is scarred, he is grieving, and he has seen hell. But he is also, for the first time, realizing that he has power. The Lord needs him more than he needs the Lord. The mud is the same, the sky is the same, but the man standing between them has changed. He has survived the end of the world, and he is ready to ask for his share of the new one. The silence is breaking, and a voice is about to rise. The silence of the plague years did not last. It was broken not by the hum of the spinning wheel or the song of the plow, but by a sound that terrifies the ruling class more than any storm. The collective growl of a people who have realized their own worth. We find ourselves now in the humid, restless summer of 1381. The air feels heavy, charged with a static electricity that makes the hair on your arms stand up. The golden age of the survivor, that brief window where wages rose and bellies were full, is under attack. The lords, terrified by the shifting balance of power, have struck back with the pen. They have passed the Statute of Laborers, a law that attempts to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, effectively trying to legislate the tides of the ocean. They want to force the peasant back into the box of serfdom, to turn the clock back to a time before the rats came. But the peasant mind has expanded, and it will not fit back inside. The tension snaps with the arrival of the poll tax. This is not a tax on land or harvest. It is a tax on existence. Every adult, regardless of how poor, must pay the same shilling. It is a regressive, stinging injustice. In the villages of Essex and Kent, the tax collectors arrive with their scrolls and their arrogant guards. But this time, they do not find heads bowed in submission. They find eyes that stare back, hard and unblinking. They find villagers who stand shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, blocking the lane. The refusal begins quietly. We have no money. But it quickly escalates. A collector is shoved into a ditch, a scroll is torn, and suddenly, the spark lands in the dry tinder of a century's worth of grievance. Listen to the voice of the uprising. It is not the polished Latin of the bishops. It is the rough, vernacular poetry of John Ball, a hedge priest who has been preaching in the open air, outside the control of the church. He asks a question that cuts through the feudal hierarchy like a scythe through wheat. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? It is a radical, dangerous theological bomb. He is saying that, in the Garden of Eden, there were no lords and no serfs. Nobility is a man-made fiction, and what man has made, man can unmake. This idea spreads through the taverns and the fields like a contagion of hope. It is whispered from village to village. Now is the time. The mob that forms is not a chaotic rabble of pitchforks, as often depicted in cartoons. Historians have analyzed the records of the rebels and found that many were village elites, reeves, constables, men who knew how to organize. They move with discipline. They march on London, the great stinking heart of the kingdom. And as they march, they do something specific and highly symbolic. They hunt for paper. They break into manor houses and abbeys, dragging out the manorial rolls, those hated parchments we saw earlier, the ones that recorded the serfs' bondage. They pile them in the courtyards and set them on fire. Watch the flames consume the records. The parchment curls, blackens, and dissolves into ash. It is a ritual cleansing. They are burning their own slavery. They believe that if they destroy the written record of their servitude, they will be free. It is a war against literacy, against the inkhorn men, the lawyers and scribes who use words to steal land. There is a fierce, terrifying joy in watching the legal justification for your misery turn into smoke. They are not looting gold, they are looting their dignity. When they reach London, the sensory experience is overwhelming. The city gates are opened. Sympathizers inside let them in. The narrow streets are flooded with thousands of muddy boots. The smell of the unwashed country meets the stench of the city gutters. They target the Savoy Palace, the home of the hated John of Gaunt. They burn it to the ground. But, and here is the discipline, they are forbidden to loot. One man caught stealing a silver cup is thrown into the fire along with the cup. We are zealots for truth and justice, not thieves and robbers, they declare. It is a moment of high moral clarity, terrifying in its purity. They camp at Smithfield, a vast open space used for livestock markets. The air is thick with the smoke of the burning city. The young king, Richard II, only 14 years old, rides out to meet them. He is a boy in velvet, surrounded by nervous knights. Facing him is Wat Tyler, the leader of the rebels, a man of the people, likely a tiler of roofs or a former soldier. The contrast is stark, the silk against the wool, the perfume against the sweat. Tyler rides up to the king, shakes his hand, an unthinkable breach of protocol, and demands not just lower taxes, but the unthinkable. Let there be no more serfs. He demands the total abolition of the feudal system. For a moment, history holds its breath. The world hangs in the balance. The king seems to agree. He nods. He grants charters of freedom. The rebels cheer, believing they have won. But then chaos erupts. A scuffle breaks out between Tyler and the king's entourage. A dagger flashes in the sunlight. Tyler falls, stabbed in the neck. The rebel army, seeing their leader fall, draws their bows. The string is taut, the arrow is knocked. A massacre is seconds away. Then the boy king does something extraordinary. He rides forward, alone, towards the angry bows. "Sirs, will you shoot your king?" he cries. "I will be your captain. I will be your leader. Follow me." It is a masterstroke of charisma. The peasants, conditioned by centuries of reverence for the anointed monarch, lower their weapons. They follow him. They are led out of the city, given promises of pardon, and told to go home. They disperse, walking back through the summer dust to their villages, clutching the king's charters of freedom like holy relics. They believe the world has changed, but as they disappear into the countryside, the king's army arrives. The betrayal is swift and brutal. The charters are revoked. Serfs you were and serfs you are. You shall remain in bondage, not as before, but incomparably worse, the king reportedly sneers. The royal captain becomes the royal executioner. Gibbets are erected along the roads. John Ball is hanged, drawn, and quartered, his head displayed on a pike as a warning. But, and this is the crucial historical debate, was it a failure? On the surface, yes. The rebellion was crushed. The leaders were dead. The laws remained. But under the surface, something had fundamentally broken. The psychological spell of feudalism was shattered. The lords had seen the capital burn. They had seen the serfs organized, armed, and fearless. A deep, lingering fear settled into the heart of the aristocracy. They realized they could not push the peasants too far. In the decades that followed, serfdom quietly withered away in England. It wasn't abolished by a grand decree. It simply became too expensive and too dangerous to enforce. The lords stopped asking for labor services and started accepting cash rent. The bound man became the tenant farmer. The legal chains rusted and fell off, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The revolt left a scar on the memory of the village. For generations, grandfathers would sit by the fire and tell the story of the day they marched to London. They would describe the heat of the burning Savoy, the look in Wat Tyler's eyes, and the moment they stood before the king as equals. Even though they returned to the mud, they walked a little taller. They knew now that they were the engine of the kingdom, and that the engine could stop. There is a bittersweet irony in this uprising. The peasants were defeated by their own trust in the king. They could not conceive of a world without a monarch. They only wanted a good monarch. They were trapped by their own worldview. Yet, their anger laid the foundation for the slow, grinding rise of the common man. They proved that the filthy peasant was not a beast of burden, but a political actor. As night falls on the smouldering ashes of 1381, the village is quiet again. The gibbet creaks in the wind at the crossroads, a grim silhouette against the moon. But in the hut, the mood has changed. The fear is still there, yes, but it is mixed with a new, dangerous pride. The parchment rolls were burned. The words of John Ball hang in the air like smoke. Who was then the gentleman? The answer is no longer silence. The answer is etched into the angry, tired, resilient faces of the people who know, deep in their bones, that they are the ones who dig the grave for the old world. And so the seasons turn, dragging the world forward, not by years, but by inches of topsoil. We have walked together through the smoke of the hearth, the mud of the lane, the terror of the plague, and the fire of the revolt. Now, let us stand back and watch the centuries blur. The medieval world does not end with a sudden curtain drop. It fades slowly, like the winter light retreating from the fields. The thatch roofs eventually rot and are replaced by slate or tile. The wattle walls crumble, returning their clay to the earth, and are replaced by brick. The great open fields, those vast communal ribbons of land we walked, are eventually enclosed by hedges and stone walls, chopped up into the private squares we recognize today. The peasant slowly transforms into the agricultural laborer, then the factory worker, and finally, into us. But before we leave them in the mist of the past, look down at the ground one last time. If you walk through the countryside of England or France today, in the early morning light when the sun is low, you can still see them. Look at the grass in a sheep pasture. It is not flat. It ripples in gentle rolling waves, like a green sea frozen in time. These are the ridge and furrow patterns, the fossilized footprints of the heavy plow and the ox team. They are the physical scars left on the planet's surface by millions of hours of peasant labor. Every undulation is a ghost of a furrow where a man or woman pushed against the wooden handles, fighting the clay to grow the bread that fed a civilization. They did not leave behind memoirs. They did not write their names on arches of triumph. They wrote their history in the dirt itself, a script of sweat and endurance that the grass still whispers today. And consider the stone cathedrals, Chartres, York, Salisbury, that soar into the sky, breathless in their beauty. We admire the stonemasons and the bishops who commissioned them. But look at the foundation. Those stones rest on a bed of peasant taxes. Every stained glass window, every flying buttress was paid for by the surplus grain, the shorn wool, and the pennies scraped together by the people in the huts. The magnificence of the medieval world is essentially a crystallized form of peasant labor. They are the silent, invisible mortar holding up the past. But their most profound legacy is not in the landscape. It is in the mirror. Look at your own hands. Look at the resilience of your own body. If you have European ancestry, you are likely the descendant not of the knights and kings, who often killed each other off in foolish wars or weakened their lines through inbreeding, but of the peasants. You are the child of the survivors. You carry the DNA of the people who survived the Great Famine of 1315, who had the genetic iron to withstand the Black Death of 1348, who endured the winter freeze without central heating, and who fought off the dysentery of the village well. Your immune system is a library of their victories. They suffered the filth so that you could have the luxury of cleanliness. They ate the grit so that you could eat the soft white bread. They lived in the dark so that you could sit in the light. There is a tendency to look back at them with pity, to see their lives as nasty, prudish, and short. And yes, it was hard. It was incredibly dirty. It was often cruel. But it was also a life of profound connection. Connection to the seasons, to the animals, to the community, and to the earth. They understood the circularity of things in a way we have forgotten. They knew that the waste of the midden heap becomes the gold of the harvest. They knew that death is just the compost for new life. They did not live in a disposable world. They lived in a recycled one. In our modern sanitized existence, where we hide death in hospitals and waste in landfills, we have lost the smell of that truth. We have scrubbed away the filth, but we have also scrubbed away some of the texture of life. As we leave the village now, the sun is setting for the final time in our story. The smoke is rising from the chimney hole, smelling of oak and bacon. A dog barks in the distance. A mother hums a lullaby to a child wrapped in wool. The lane is muddy, yes, but it leads home. The peasant stands in the doorway, wiping his hands on his tunic. He looks tired, older than his years, his face mapped with the weather. He does not know that he is a historical subject. He does not know that 1,000 years later, we will be whispering about him. He only knows that the fire is warm, the stew is hot, and he has done his duty. He has kept the world alive for one more day. He turns, steps inside, and closes the heavy wooden door. The latch clicks shut. The light from the cracks fades. The village dissolves into the shadows of history, leaving only the wind moving through the trees, the same wind that blows outside your window tonight. They are gone, but they are not lost. They are in the soil. They are in the stone. They are in the blood. The filth is washed away, but the strength remains. Now, let the centuries blur and soften. The heavy wooden door is closed, and the village is sleeping. The smoke drifts away into the night sky, becoming one with the stars. Let the images of the mud and the cold fade, leaving only a sense of deep, abiding warmth. You are safe here, in your own time, in your own bed. The struggles of the past are over. They are just stories now, whispers in the library of time. Feel the softness of your own blankets, lighter and cleaner than the heavy wool, but just as protective. Let your breathing slow down, matching the rhythm of the quiet earth. The history is done. The work is finished. There is nothing left to plow, nothing left to harvest, nothing left to fear. Just the gentle, endless drift of the dark. You are part of the long, unbroken chain of life. And now, it is your turn to rest. Sleep well. Sleep deep. Good night.